This is Coffee with Kelly, a dynamic podcast that's dedicated to driving positive change in school safety. I'm your host, Ethan Woodman, Product Marketing Specialist for Crisis Go, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Kelly Moore, Senior School Safety Specialist for Crisis Go. Our mission is to empower you with essential knowledge, tools, and inspiration required to foster a safer and more secure school environment. We hope this podcast will be the catalyst for transformation in your schools. Join us as we continue to dive into the world of school safety. Good morning, Kelly.
Good morning.
You're always trying to stump me.
I'm trying to stump you.
Trying to get me to crack up right at the beginning. I see what you're doing.
Got to set the tone.
That's right.
We always talk about serious stuff, so we got to start off with a smile. Maybe we should end with a smile.
just sit there at the end like.
Right. So what do we got going today?
Well, we can start off with a news section here.
Mm-hmm.
So the article that I'm bringing up to you today is, I'll read the headline for you. It is Mom Sues Missouri School that suspended 13-year-old son for making rifle out of Dr. Pepper cans.
Mm-hmm. And just so that we're clear, it's not a working rifle, right?
No, it's literally, I don't know if they're full cans or empty cans, but regardless, they're cans laid out on what looks like maybe the bed in an orientation that resembles the shape of either some AK-47, AR-15 style thing. So this happened back in early September of 2024. Was when this 13-year-old took a picture of this and posted it on Snapchat. I don't know if it went to a story or sent it out to specific people or not. It doesn't say that. Yep. I think it's because he's a minor that they can't divulge a whole bunch of information, but
yeah, there's a couple of things going on, right? Because of the lawsuit, they can't say anything because that might impact the lawsuit and the results of the lawsuit based upon what they say.
Yep.
Yeah, so we have very little information, if I understand it correctly. We have a picture that was posted. So let me ask you, before we start talking about this, is there any significance as to the time frame this was posted?
I think it was September 13th or something like that, 2024. So the first thing I would think of is that this is shortly before the election that happened. Okay. So I think there was probably already a lot of
politics and stuff
going around, and obviously tensions are already kind of high with that. So I'm sure that this didn't help. That's the first thing I could think of.
So there's the politics going on, but there
was a shooting near that time, wasn't there?
Mm-hmm. There was. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, we've talked about the number of incidences that occur shortly after an extended break. Right? So now we're coming back to school. This is a week or two after most schools have started, or in some, depending on where you're from, some of them start in early to mid-August. So you might have a month in school. But from an assessment perspective, that might sort of start bringing heightened alert to that, right? So
yeah. Let me ask you this.
Mm-hmm.
Is this enough to warrant being suspended from school for 3 days?
Don't know what the school rules are. I don't know what the policies are.
That is what happened. They suspended him for 3 days.
Yeah. So we know that there are obviously constitutional issues at stake here, right? Free speech, the ability to communicate with people, even though it sort of resembles, it is clearly not a weapon.
Yeah.
Right? So it is some full-size cans, whether they're empty or full, that are arranged to somewhat resemble an AR-15 or an AK-47 or some sort of similar weapon, right?
Yeah.
But it's clearly not a weapon. When we start talking about the context, when we start doing assessments or we start punishing kids and we start looking at the meaning of what this picture is trying to convey, we have to put it into context. So if somebody just posts a picture of, even let's take it out of the Dr. Pepper can and say it was an actual rifle. What's the context? What does that mean? What was the intended message? And to whom was that message for? It's not illegal to, even for a 13-year-old, to post a picture of a actual AR-15 or an AK-47. It's not against the law.
That's true.
Question comes in is, how do you punish a kid if there's no context to the picture?
Yeah.
And if you read further down, if I remember the quote or the information, I'm not going to quote it verbatim, but if we look at that, we know that there was at least, I think the statement is we have substantial evidence that at least one person was in fear.
Yeah.
Well, what does that mean? Was that person the intended target, or was somebody just scared? Because somebody being afraid of a picture does not make it threatening, if that makes sense, right? You have to establish that it's more than just being afraid. We've talked about this pretty extensively. Fear is subjective.
I'm terrified of spiders.
Right?
You might not be terrified of spiders.
Well, it depends how big they are.
Yeah.
And the proximity to crawling up my leg or not. Right.
They could be like across the room and I'm like terrified.
The context and fear being subjective, there are many things that people are afraid of that I am not, and vice versa. We can't write laws and school rules that say that nobody can be afraid of a picture. Or theoretically, I could post a picture of a crowd, and if somebody has fear of crowds, that picture may provoke anxiety, fear. I can't go there. I can't do that. Or a picture of a spider, or a picture of a high place looking down into the Grand Canyon, or something like that. Those all provoke fear. They're going to provoke fear in somebody.
That's true.
So we can't say that. And people are going to say, well, obviously your use cases are different than posting this abstract sculpture of a or impromptu sculpture of a weapon. But we know that there is no way that that weapon that was posted can be used. The only way that that could be used as a weapon is if they're full and somebody starts throwing them at each, right?
Yeah.
So we have to look at what the context of the threat is. Now, it's a whole different story if the student says, hey, this one's meant for you, Ethan, and the next one is going to be real. That's a whole different conversation.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And I think there's this trend or tendency to overprotect. And this, for me, and again, I'm going to qualify this by saying, without any further context, this is a situation that requires nothing more than, hey, little Stevie, and I don't know the kid's name. I don't know that we know, but little Stevie, maybe we should reconsider doing stuff like this.
Right.
Right? Mom, can you kind of put a squash to this? But when you start making notations in their permanent record, and that you're calling them cyber bullies when they're posting a picture of a, and I get the concern, but it's a concern that can be addressed at, and we get back and we'll talk a little bit more about this in the main body of the podcast, is putting it into context, understanding, but acting appropriately. and communicating appropriately at the appropriate levels. But when you start suspending kids and you start making permanent notations in their records that are going to follow them, you better be right, because this is going to happen.
How long does something stay in your, like, when they say your record, you just mean their academic record, right?
Your academic record, we can call it your academic record, but it includes all of your discipline. It's a student file that follows you as you go through. In fact, if you leave districts, it goes to the new district.
Right, but like if this kid is out of school and goes to look for a job, they're not going to look at his background check and be like, "Oh, you got tagged for this for being a cyberbully in school." They're not going to see that, right?
My answer is I don't know, because what if he wants to be a teacher? I don't know
Mm,
what the academic, I don't know that they go
okay,
that far or what.
but yeah, I mean, it's
It's been obviously a long time since I've been in school, but I remember being told this is going to be on your permanent record.
I never had to worry about that. So
Yeah. I was not an angel. I was not an angel in school. I wasn't.
I mean,
I mean, I got in trouble. I did kid stuff, right? And I got in trouble, and they're going to say, you got to stop doing this. This is going to be in your permanent record. And they always implied that it was going to follow you for the rest of your life. It's permanent, right? And so as a child, you always thought, well, I guess that's going to be with me forever. I do know that I have been asked for high school transcripts as an adult. I think those are grades and stuff, but that was related to my college applications and so forth. So I don't know how far they travel with you, but still the fear is that now other considerations are going to be made, or evaluations are going to be made based upon this notation that was made, in at least the parents' view, inappropriately. Not to get into the actual constitutionality of this, but how far can a school reach out into non-school related activities of a student? As an example, can I get disciplined for something I do on the soccer field?
if you're playing for the school,
If you're playing for the school, you can.
I would
I
think
get it.
so.
But if I'm playing AYSO youth soccer, can I? Little league baseball,
Eh,
right? I don't know. But
I would say no.
you would say,
that's
but
me though.
now take this to communicating with friends after school. Now I'm not blaming the kid who reported it to the school, or however the school came across this information. If
Yeah.
I was a school, I'd want that information.
Mm-hmm.
But you also, when you look at the context of everything, you have to ask your question. Thanks, this is interesting, but what do I need to do with it? What are the actions that are appropriate? Because here's the reality from Kelly's perspective. You be interested in something, in a child's behavior that is outside of the school. You may be interested in that, but you may not have, and I'm going to use this in air quotes, you may not have jurisdiction to take action.
Mm.
But if you think it's serious enough and that it really elevates it to a heightened concern, maybe that's when you report it to the appropriate agency, law enforcement, maybe a probation department if the child's on probation, and saying, hey, look at this. What should we do with this? Maybe some counseling might be appropriate there. Maybe they could look into the context. Maybe they could see if there's a criminal offense. Maybe there's lots of things that we can do with that information that doesn't involve school disciplinary action.
Yeah. I mean, I think being suspended for school for 3 days is kind of a little much for what it is. I mean, what I compare it to is, okay, but like all these kids are playing video games that are obviously like first person shooter type of
Shooters.
games or something. Like that's way more involved than putting Dr. Pepper cans together. Like,
Yeah, but
But are they reporting that? Or they're saying, hey, this kid's playing this shooter game 3 times a week or something? Like, no, they're not doing that. So,
Well,
I don't know.
but that's a perfect example of context, right?
Right.
So, yeah, am I going to report somebody who's using first-person shooter video games, playing with their friends and stuff? Probably not, unless somebody says, I am training myself to become
Yeah.
an active shooter.
Then it's like,
That
hold
whoa,
on.
time out, right? I mean,
Put the
I've told you
brakes
this.
on.
I've told you this story many times about my
Yeah.
son and I, right? Where we were playing. He wanted, I think it was his 10th or 11th birthday. We got some paintball guns, and here I am. I'm a trained law enforcement professional. In fact, I'm working in special operations, so I wasn't on the SWAT team, but I had a fair amount of additional specialized tactical operations training for us doing search warrants and stuff. And so here I am, and I think I'm just going to really just beat this kid. He's 11-year-old. And we start by going in opposite directions. We have a certain amount of time and to position yourself tactically to
Sure.
find and use the paint guns on each other, right? And I'll be damned if my kid didn't go to the high ground. And he got me. And I'm thinking, dude, why did you do that? And he goes, video games. And there's this big conversation about whether or not video games contribute to violence and, quote, make kids more violent. And I'll argue that. I'm not an expert in the area, so somebody will probably come and say, well, you're not an expert. And I go, you're right, I'm not. But I don't think that violent games make violent people. But I will say that I believe that violent games will make violent people more violent or better at being violent because there's tactics involved that they may or may not think about, right? And they'll learn about it, as is the example of my kid. My kid, well-adjusted, great kid, never became violent. He's in the military, but at that time, he was tactical. And he became a better opponent, a more challenging opponent to me in this game that we were playing because of his training on video games. So again, it's context. Is there a time to report that? Yes. If you have all this other information and you know that they're avid participants, then we're gonna figure that out. As we get into the meat and potatoes of the actual podcast, the main topic here, which is looking at the difference between academic success or lack thereof and behavior success or lack thereof, and looking at the two pathways to success or violence, depending on your perspective. It's all about identifying the appropriate action based upon the context of what you're looking at.
Do you want me to pull up that slide? Your pathway to violence slide?
Sure. Yeah, pull that up. When we are doing a threat assessment, what we're really trying to do is ultimately trying to prevent an attack. But more specifically, we're trying to determine, one, if somebody is on this pathway to violence, where they are at. Once we determine where they're at, we can determine the level of the threat. But ultimately, what we want to do is steer them off this pathway. And when we look at that, the purpose is really to establish what is the appropriate intervention. What is the appropriate action that we are going to take? And if we are just trying to figure this out, we don't have a plan, we don't have the training, we don't have context, and we're just saying, oh, I think it's this, and you don't have any correlating actions to take, if you find somebody who is being victimized and they're at this stage, they're frustrated, they're asking for help, I'm being victimized. If you don't have at least some sort of defined actions that are
Mm.
appropriate for that level, then you're just guessing. You're just saying, okay, here's the response that if you don't have an appropriate plan of action. And this is the one we hear all of the time. Don't worry, it's just schoolyard behavior, or it's just third graders being third graders. It's just kids being kids. We're past that.
If I'm a concerned parent and I
Hmm.
know that my kid's being victimized and I hear from the school, don't worry, we're taking care of it.
How?
And it just gets left at that.
That's inappropriate. That's You need to tell me how. As a parent,
Yeah.
I need to know what you're doing to protect my child. I need to know what actions that you are doing to ensure that my kid is not being victimized, right? And then, but the other side of that is, if my child is being victimized, by whom and what actions are you taking? You don't need to know who the kid is because you have privacy issues, right?
Hmm.
But you need to know what actions are being taken. What are you doing to protect my child? What are you doing to prevent that other child, the bully, or in many cases the teacher? What are you doing to protect my child from being victimized? It's important for us to understand the actual purpose of this. While ultimately we're trying to prevent an attack from occurring, we're really trying to establish a plan of action that prevents them from even going to the next level,
Right.
right?
Like you don't even want you definitely don't want them to get to the violent ideation stage.
That's correct.
I mean, ideally, you don't even want them to get to the victimization stage, but I imagine it's probably harder to prevent that. I would assume,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
because everyone feels victimized at different levels, right? You've got people that are pretty minor thing could happen, and hey, I'm a victim, or
Yeah. Mhm.
hey, one of my relatives passed away. Now I feel that grievance or something.
Yeah. Let's address why it is so important to keep somebody from jumping to the violent ideation stage. And here's why this is a critical piece. That is, once somebody has, and when I say a violent ideation, what I'm talking about is somebody has determined that the answer to their solution, their grievance, is violence.
Mm,
It's very difficult to get them off of that resolution. You could temporarily say, I got them thinking better, but it only takes a very small act to put them back onto violent ideation. As an example, as a somebody who's thinking that way, I think that the only way I'm going to be able to solve this problem is to become violent. I'm going to do some act somewhere against the the people who are wronging me, right?
hmm.
And then I find that out as a school, and I start intervening, and I talk the person down and say, look, this really isn't, but we need to solve this problem. We're going to help you work your way through this. We're going to get you counseling. We're going to start addressing all of these other things that you're saying is happening to you, et cetera, et cetera. And they're going to say, okay, let's give that a try. And then the first time that they experience another act of bullying or another act of being wronged, they're going to jump right back into, see, I told you this wouldn't work. I've tried everything, and you keep telling me this will work. And I walk out of here 2 days later, I'm cornered in the hallway, and there's no teachers around to protect me. There's no things, and I
Mm.
get bullied. Somebody steals my lunch money, whatever the case may be. And you get into the realization that they believe that you can't protect them. And this is why this is one of the, in my mind, is one of the most critical steps, that we need to keep kids at this grievance at no higher than this grievance stage, because the further they go, the more difficult it is to bring them back off of that pathway.
Mm.
One of the things that I say often, and sometimes I don't necessarily articulate it correctly or well enough, is when we start looking at the pathway to violence, oftentimes what we're looking to identify are what we call concerning behaviors. And there's lots of them. I'm not going to go into all of them, but some of them are change in dress, drastic decline in academic performance, isolation, disengaging, refusing to engage in school activities, these types of things, right? But those are the manifestations of a child in stress or in distress, and they're trying to figure things out, and they're struggling. You might have anxiety, you might have depressions that weren't previously observed, but those are the same kinds of behaviors that we would also be looking for in academic failure, that we would also relate to the pathway to violence. Maybe substance abuse, alcohol, smoking cigarettes, defiance, a lack of caring about what other people think, et cetera, right? Where that differentiates is the context of what it is that they are going to do or not do in furtherance of their ideology, right? So if you have a child who is struggling academically, there's a lot of emotions. There's distress, there's just stress, there's things that are occurring that now are going to manifest themselves into these concerning behaviors. What are they choosing to do with that? Are they just going to go down this pathway to academic failure? Are they going to maybe start going down the pathway to violence? Maybe they're going to go down the pathway to suicide, right? And so the concerning behaviors are very similar, but we have to figure out why or what they intend to do with those behaviors. And I think that's the challenge. We play in an academic world. We're in where we're always evaluating for academics. And I think we're neglecting to explore the possibility that a child who is academically challenged may also be suicidal, who may also be homicidal, right? Where we have all of the same behaviors, but are we asking the right questions? Are we exploring the possibility that they may want to hurt themselves or others as a result of what they're feeling and their behaviors? We tend to focus on academics. 100% understand that. But again, we're at a stage where in the evolution of life, we're at a stage where we have to start asking all of the questions, not just assume that this is somebody's just struggling with academics. They're struggling with coping skills. They're struggling with social skills. They're struggling with mental health. They're struggling with all kinds of things that can manifest themselves into a number of possibilities. We need to explore all of those possibilities.
Now, let me ask you, because I feel like it might be a question some others might be thinking about, is does one prove the other, or does one pathway mean you're also on the other pathway? So if I'm struggling academically, does that mean that I'm also likely to be somewhere on this pathway of violence? And then the other way around of, hey, if I'm in this violent ideation stage, does that mean I'm going to be somewhere on the academic risk pathway? Do they correlate in some way
No,
or no?
they're not mutually inclusive or exclusive,
Okay.
right? So they're independent but similar. You can be on a single pathway or you could be on all of them, if that makes sense. So every child is on their own pathway. Some kids are failing academically because of a lot of different issues: ADD, ADHD, mental health issues, developmental issues, and so forth. So they're struggling academically, and we have IEPs and 504s that cover all of that stuff. And you could have these children that spend their entire academic career being supported by these programs and do as best they can and be successful based upon their definition of whatever that means to that specific child, without ever thinking about suicide or violence. You could have somebody who has a lot of stressors, a lot of stuff that is just thinking about harming themselves and be academically sound. And in fact, I'll give you a case that I had when I was in detectives. I was a lieutenant in detectives, I think, at the time. We had a suicide of a young lady. I think she was a sophomore in high school. The suicide note was, "I can't handle the stress and pressure of being academically successful." Parents were expecting the child who was very smart, by all means, well adjusted, just was done with all of the academic pressure for her to succeed in everything that she did academically, be at the top of her list. And they wanted scholarships. They wanted, the best the best schools, those types of things. So when you're
Wow.
talking about the kind of pressure that we as parents put on them, she was academically successful, no intention of violence. She was just done with it. And then obviously we have kids that have been academically successful who have had no intentions of committing suicide and have been violent. So, but we've also had kids who have been failing miserably academically, have thought about suicide, and have chosen to be violent. So they've been all three.
You can either be some combination of the three, or
Yep.
none of the three, or all of the three, or
Yep. Yeah.
yeah.
So
Okay.
that's the challenge for us, right? You're never going to know unless you explore the possibilities. In fact, the shooter in my case was all three.
Wow.
It was a college student who struggled socially, had essentially given up on academics in school, and in some cases he was a registered student, but may or may not have ever attended class, had given up academically and became violent. And the rest is history, as they say. So,
I mean, I would think that in those cases, it's more likely to be noticed, or it's a little more obvious. Or do you think that schools would obviously pay more attention to that? Like, is there,
well, it depends on what they're focused on.
like, in your opinion, like, is the likelihood more likely if you're all three?
To be noticed?
Or
No.
like, let's say you are in your case, like, right, you are struggling academically, you're very isolated, right, you're making posts online or something about, you're into this, you're into this violent behavior, you're going to do this, or you're bullying and stuff like that. Like, do you think that that's more likely than the student who's, all there academically, like, top of their class, they don't have any, homicidal flags, I guess is what you call it. I don't know if you get what I'm trying to ask,
Yeah,
like,
I get it.
it's a
Is
tough question, but
it is. It's what you're essentially asking, if I understand it, and let me phrase it, is one more prevalent than the other and more easily
yeah.
identified? The answer to that is probably not, but the course of action is, if you find somebody's struggling at any one of these three, you
Mhm.
need to ask about the other two. You need to determine whether or not the other two apply. And people are going to say, really? Every time somebody fails a grade, that you want me to ask them if they're suicidal or homicidal? That's not.
No, I mean, you can ask different questions than that, but
You can ask different, but you can also look and you can talk to them,
yeah, it's like, hey, what's
right?
going on?
And
You know?
especially if somebody was doing very well and then all of a sudden dropped off,
Mm,
then that becomes, those are a little bit easier when you
that'd be a little
have
more
a
obvious.
distinct, yeah, to identify when you have a distinct change in behavior. That's why when you talk to Patrick Van Horn and Left the Bang, you have to establish a baseline.
Mhm.
And he talks about establishing a baseline for your entire school. But he also talks about if you have the ability to establish a baseline for a particular individual, then you can establish that individual. And that's what I advocate
Mm.
is, you know, in our last podcast, we talked about where does it all start,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And we talked about we're receiving these kids at the earliest age, 4 or 5 years old, but there's 4 or 5 years, depending on your circumstances, that you're receiving a child that you have no idea what their history is, how they're brought up, developmental stage, and so forth. We have to establish a baseline for each and every kid when they come in. You can't just say, oh, we're going to, let's see what the behavior is. Let's see how they interact. Let's see how social they are, how withdrawn, how shy, how outgoing, introverted, extrovert, how they are, and see how we can support all of those children to move in the right, I'm going to say right direction. People are going to say, oh, that's everyone has the right direction
Yeah,
for that child, right?
yeah.
Move them
So
into a positive direction.
I'm gonna throw a wrench in here for you because
Certainly.
so okay, so then you mentioned, all right, we get these kids at like a really early age. Okay, so what
Mhm.
about I'm a school and now this kid has just moved to our state from a totally different state. He's brand new to our school, but it's high school.
Mhm.
Am I able to establish a baseline? Like, how do I go about doing that? Is it the same process where I wait, I watch him for a little bit to see kind of what that baseline is? Because I mean, history's proven that there's something that's happened in the past. I'm not going to get into it,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
right that we
yeah.
there
I,
was a new student that came in, and then it was only what a couple weeks.
yeah, sure.
So that doesn't give a school a whole lot of time to figure out, oh, this kid was struggling with stuff. How do we deal with that?
We start with what we know,
Okay.
right? And we know, and what we've experienced says a lot in how we approach strangers,
Mm.
new situations. And if we are practicing our skills and developing and refining our skills in how to read people, when I go to Las Vegas, what's one of my favorite things to do?
You people watch.
People watch.
Like, when
Why?
did that become a thing?
What's that?
Is it like, when did that become a thing?
It's a thing. And the reason I do that is I'm developing my evaluation skills, my assessment skills. I look at people and you can tell very quickly who are the troublemakers, who are the ones that are
Yeah, yeah.
going and you who are going to be aggressive, the ones that are going to challenge you directly. And what happens when you see that? You avoid them, you watch them more carefully. But if you just take the position that every kid is a great kid and until they prove me different, then you're going to be behind the learning curve, right? So
Hmm.
if we're actively practicing every day, looking at our kids and trying to establish a baseline and where they are and what they've decided they're going to do today, and we see and we notice a change in that behavior, then that's when we start paying more attention to them. And you can do that on that very first day of school. of that child, you can go in, introduce yourself, welcome with open arms. If you need any help, let me know. And, create this sort of positive and see how they react to that. Right.
Mm.
So the other thing that I told you I do a bunch is when I'm in public, I say hi to everyone that looks at me, and I look at everybody, being courteous, being neighborly, whatever you want to say. But there's a purpose behind that, because how they respond, normal society is good morning with a response. Good morning. How's your day going? Fine. How are you feeling today? Fantastic. Right? Those are normal type responses. But if somebody comes back with a different response, a negative response, that tells you something in 30 seconds.
Hmm.
Right?
So maybe the whole like greeting students as they come in is like a real good step to do, because then you quickly get that
Absolutely.
instant like, okay, this
Right?
kid seems like he's doing good, and that kid seems like he's already off. So
Yep. And if he's off, let's figure that out, because what we're trying to do is separate the normal from the abnormal, or the
Mhm.
abnormal from the normal, right? And focus on those things that concern us, those behaviors that concern us. And little Susie had a great week last week, but she is super depressed Monday morning when she comes in. And you
Mm.
say, "Hey, Susie, how you doing?" "Oh, not good." "What happened? Did you have a good weekend?" "No." Explore it. You want to be the teacher, the administrator, the janitor, the whoever school staff that is interacting with every kid as much as possible. You don't want to be that person that is rushing late to class. "Everyone take your seats, let's get going," because you've just lost that opportunity to greet those kids when they're coming in.
Mm.
You've lost that ability to interact and see. You've lost that ability to assess any issues that they're having by just saying, "Okay, you're all business. I don't care about you. Let's get started." As opposed to, "Welcome, welcome. Take a seat. We're going to get started in a little bit. How's everyone going today? How's everyone?" And seeing how those responses are. Are people engaged? Are people withdrawn? Is there somebody who's not paying any attention to what happened? You might not, probably wouldn't confront them right then, but on the way out, you say, "Hey, Johnny, can you stick around a little bit? You seemed a little withdrawn today. Everything all right?"
Mm.
30 seconds. You have a conversation. If something comes up, you address it. If they are withdrawn, maybe you make a note to speak with their counselor. If something comes up, maybe you take them down to the office and say, "Hey, he's struggling. This is why. This is what he said. Let's get some help here."
I mean, there's a lot of power in just, as a student, knowing that like your teacher is that observant and is noticing you, right? That you're not totally just this ghost in the class.
Yep.
It's, I think there's a lot of power in that. Of, I think just that could definitely change.
Do you know how powerful positive reinforcement is? It's huge.
Yeah, I mean, just saying, "Hey, I noticed you today," like
Yep.
that right there is like, wow, okay, like someone actually does notice me.
I struggled in school, especially early on. I was not the best student, especially in elementary school. It was difficult for me to read. I'm not an avid reader. I'm not particularly fond of reading. When I got into, it was about the sixth grade. It was in my area. It was in my time. It was still elementary school. One of my teachers recognized that I had pretty good skills mathematically, and they put me into a special program for
Hmm.
mathematics. And I was doing, at the time in sixth grade, I was doing eighth grade, seventh and eighth grade math, but I was accelerating through it. Probably saved my academic career because it got me more involved in things that I liked to do, because the mathematics was, to me, a puzzle, was something that I could challenge
Hmm.
myself with. and reading was just not that exciting to me, and it was difficult for me to engage and keep my interest. But it was because this one teacher said, "Hey, you've got something here. Let's work on that." Then, when I went into junior high, I had a teacher who recognized that I had some sort of leadership skills and asked me to join the yearbook. And so then I did well. And now I started to read a little bit because I was now essentially writing stuff. And eventually I became the editor of our yearbook. And so I had a little bit more interest because I was involved with something that interests me at the time. So academically, these teachers who were involved and looking at what I could do well and trying to build on that probably saved me academically. And some of my early teachers knew that I actually graduated from college. They'd be shocked. Right?
It's funny you bring up the yearbook because it makes me remember. I'm like, you know what? I kind of had a similar thing where like I think I don't know if I joined the yearbook class or some, or if I was asked to do it, but someone noticed that like I think I was really into like starting out doing graphic design stuff at that time, and they're like, oh, you should do some of the design stuff. So I think I can't remember if I did. I know I did the back cover. I don't know if I did the front cover, but I definitely did like the signature pages. So on each inside page, we had a place where you can just write your little signature notes and stuff on a yearbook. So I did those pages, and so
Yeah.
that was cool. It's like having someone notice that you have a skill and saying, hey, let's use this skill. Let's build it up.
Yeah, I started
That's
out
really
as
cool.
a student photographer and became one of the student photographers, became the head photographer, and then the editor the following year.
Wow.
And so
Photography, huh? I never knew.
Yeah.
Are you like into photography now, or
No, I mean, I
no?
like taking pictures. I've got a whole bunch on my on my phone, but I like taking pictures.
I'm surprised you don't have like really nice quality like photos of deer.
I might.
You could, like you've got the setup.
The point is if somebody's struggling, maybe they won't struggle somewhere else. Maybe you can exploit that.
Right.
Maybe you can build on that. But you have to take an interest in, you have to start assessing kids. And it's so easy to do once you get the technique down and looking at them, establishing and paying attention to what they're doing and not doing. And I think that's where we often fail as a society or what have you. I'm here to teach. I'm not here to, I've got this lesson plan. That doesn't mean I'm supposed to do this or that or what have you. I would argue that you are responsible for developing that child, not just educating the child, because there's a difference between educating and learning.
I can tell you what, just so like obviously my college experience is more relatable to all this. So I can tell you, I remember the names of my teachers who were really good and who were really not so good.
Mm-hmm.
That gave me a negative experience. I don't remember any of the teachers that were in between. I don't remember any ones that were obviously just there to do a job and left. I can't even tell you what their face looked like.
Where does your mom lie in there?
Well, she's my mom, so
yeah, right. Yeah, no, I 100%
can't
agree.
forget that.
Right? I remember, and I'm in my 60s. I remember my kindergarten teacher's name.
That's crazy.
And there are a few teachers. I could not tell you who my first grade teacher was. I could not tell you my second grade. I can tell you who my third, fourth, and fifth grade teachers were.
Wow.
My sixth grade too, because my fifth and sixth grade teachers were the same. But then you get into, well, there was that one teacher.
I don't know if that was positive or negative.
It was both. It was both. I was going to say in middle school, I have some very good experiences with a
Uh,
few of my teachers in middle school. The one was my social studies teacher. He was okay. He was kind of a quirky little guy. The reason I remember him so well is because early in my career in law enforcement, I arrested him. And
oh man, full circle.
I looked at his name and I didn't recognize him initially.
That's hysterical.
And he had just a minor traffic warrant. It wasn't anything.
Oh, okay.
And I looked at him and I go, "Did you used to teach?" And he goes, "Yeah." And since I'm a twin, when I recognize somebody and I'm not 100% that they recognize who I am, I ask, "Hey, do you remember so and so?" I use my twin's name. And he go, "Yeah, not so much, but I do remember his brother." And I says, "Well, that's me." Because my twin and I are almost polar opposites. He just kind of goes along with the flow, and I was more involved in sports, more involved in the school, extracurricular activities and stuff. So most of them remember me versus him because I was more outgoing. And I said, "Well, that's me." And he goes, "Oh."
He's like, oh shoot.
Yeah. So
That's funny.
the point of this all is that kids notice you. And I will tell you that many kids will say things like, "Good teacher, but didn't help me,
Mm.
didn't support me when right? And
They were good at teaching, but maybe not.
remember teaching, but I went to them trying to get help and they just sort of pushed me aside. There are ways for us, and I think this is ultimately this is what I'm trying to convey in this podcast is
this your key takeaways?
yeah, pretty much.
I'm gonna try to remember this as we come to a close. give me
Right.
your give me your takeaways
Yeah.
for our listeners.
If we're doing our jobs as teachers and stewards of our kids and stewards of society, we are looking at establishing baselines and establishing when somebody deviates from their baseline and understanding the appropriate action to take. Many of the behaviors that we're going to observe that are deviations from the baseline, these are the concerning behaviors, the behaviors that alert us to a situation, have multiple meanings depending on the context of what's going on. And this goes back to the beginning of the story. What is the context of that picture of the rifle made out of soda cans, right?
Mm.
What is the context? And what is the context of this behavior that you're observing that is outside of the baseline? What is the context? Is it academic failure? Is it a suicidal risk? Is it a violent risk? Is it all three? Is it two of the three? Which two? Which three? What is it? And what are the prescribed actions? We talk almost every podcast about reducing the reactionary gap. We usually talk about it in the context of response to violence, but there is a reactionary gap when we're responding to deviations in behavior from the baseline. How many times have we sat back and said, that's just having a bad day? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe something traumatic happened over the weekend that needs support. They don't know how to ask for it. Maybe they had a huge incident of being bullied that crossed the line that is really traumatic to them. Let's address that. Let's start the conversation. Let's start the intervention, even if it is just a conversation. If it's something that concerns you more or piques your curiosity, let's explore that. Let's start saying, okay, let's work through it this way and see how that works out for us. But if you still continue to see a pattern or you start to see a pattern develop, then that means you need to escalate this somehow, whether it's your intervention or transferring that intervention to somebody who is more appropriate, has more skills, more time, more resources, etc. Understand that as we're doing that, we're trying to find the context. What does it mean? Is it just academics? Is it suicidal? Or is it threatening of violence? And again, we have to have these predefined actions based upon what it is that we're seeing. And that once you reach a certain level, that's going to trigger an intervention by the counselor. You reach something up, that's going to trigger an intervention maybe by the principal or a parent or both, right? But I can't define those for you. You need to define them for yourselves. If I see this, my actions are this. Maybe I have a couple of choices there, but they're predefined. So I don't have to think about what's the best way to do it, because the other thing about predefined actions is that it becomes easier for them to act upon them and not dismiss them. Right? If this, then this.
Probably easier to delegate too, right? If you're coming up with those actions, it's probably easier to go over that with your team and say, hey, when you
Yes.
see this is generally how we should be responding. Obviously, if you think it warrants something different, then maybe tweak it a little bit.
And I will say that there is the need to document once you determine certain interventions. If you're just having a conversation and you're satisfied with the conversation, then if you start having that conversation every other day, then something needs to change there, right? But documentation allows us to look back and see what we've tried to do and maybe adjust the course a little bit. I'll give you this one last thing that I used to do when I was in law enforcement. Obviously, the agency loved giving out traffic tickets. I was not a fan of just writing tickets to write tickets. I looked at it this way. A ticket is meant to correct an action. Stop at the stop sign, slow down, quit making unsafe turns, unsafe lane changes, whatever, right? It's to correct an action. If my contact with the driver was such that I was confident that my conversation with them was going to correct that behavior, there was no need to document it with a citation. But if I didn't think, and I felt like they were going to speed up as soon as I got off the freeway or what have you, then they got a ticket. There are, of course, some circumstances which the violation was so egregious they got a ticket or taken to jail anyway, right?
Yeah.
But the fact is we can have a conversation. And if I feel like you're going to correct that behavior or work on it, then I don't need to document it. But if I think this is going to be an issue in the future, I want to be able to tell the judge, this is the third time I've cited this person.
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah, I think we have to do a better job at establishing that baseline. Intervene at the lowest level. We have the most opportunity to be successful at the other end. Just work through that with the child. I mean, that's what we're talking about here, is working through kids that are struggling and help them navigate those. We all have struggles. We all have challenges. It's nice to have somebody to help us do that.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And if you have any questions about what we discussed, leave a comment on our website at crisisgo.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Coffee with Kelly, a discussion on school safety.